In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating an integrated I-cord cast on, and this technique can be used to do things like shaping at the underarm where you need to cast on stitches, but you want to keep an integrated I-cord trim along the armhole edge. So that is what I did on this project here on both sides. On one side, I had to do the cast on at the start of the row, and on the other side, I had to do the cast on at the end of the row. So I will be demonstrating both of those today. I have my demonstration swatch here, and I have an integrated I-cord trim on each edge of the work. It's important to note this isn't truly a cast on in the traditional sense, but we're going to be working some increases that create a cast on effect. Traditionally, at the start of the row for an I-cord, you would be slipping these stitches, but due to the nature of how this works, you do have to knit this first row, so your I-cord will be a little bit off on this one spot here. So you will just work across the first couple of stitches of the I-cord until you are at the last stitch of your I-cord. In this case, I have a 3-stitch I-cord, so I've worked 2 stitches and I have 1 stitch left on the needles here. And now I'm just going to knit through the front and back loops of this next stitch to work an increase. So knit through the front and knit through the back loop. And now I have 4 stitches on the needle. I still have those I-cord stitches here and my increased stitch here. So now I'm just going to slip all 4 of those stitches back onto the left-hand needle. And I'm going to repeat that process to continue my cast on. So we'll knit across the first 2 stitches of this I-cord since I have a 3-stitch I-cord edge, and then knit through the front and back loops of the last stitch of the I-cord. And now I have another stitch cast on here. Slip all of those stitches back to the left-hand needle and continue to repeat the process. You'll notice as you work that there is a gap in between the stitches of your work and the stitches that you have just cast on. So we need to resolve that gap by working an increase. So that means you'll be casting on 1 fewer stitch than the total number of stitches you need to cast on, because your last increased stitch is going to come from closing this gap here. So we're going to work our way over to that stitch. I've worked across my last cast on stitch there, and now I'm going to work a lifted increase, and in this case I'm working a purled lifted increase to help close that gap. So to work a right leaning lifted increase that's purled, I'm just going to slide my needle through this purl bump from front to back, lift that stitch onto my needles here to create that extra stitch, and that stitch is going to help us close the gap. So I'm just going to purl that stitch, and that increase will help fill in the gap since we're crossing over those stitches there. Just kind of helps to visually fill things in. I've gotten to near the end of my row, and this is a little bit different than the cast on at the start of the row since we're going to be stopping 1 stitch short of the I-cord that we have at the edge here. So what we're going to be doing here is working increases through the front and back loop on this stitch here, that stitch right before we reach our I-cord, working to the end of the row, and then slipping the stitches back and repeating that process so we get our cast on stitches. Again, this is not a true cast on, but it results in new stitches added on, and it keeps that I-cord edge that we have here at the edge of our work. So we're going to knit through the front and the back loop here, and then just knit to the end of the row. And then slip stitches back onto the left-hand needle. In this case, we have our 3 I-cord stitches plus 1 additional stitch that we're going to be working that increase into, and repeat that process. So we will knit through the front and back loop, and then knit to the end of the row. Slip all of those stitches back onto the left-hand needle, all of the I-cord plus 1 extra stitch, and knitting through the front and back loop, knitting to the end of the row. And you just continue that process until you've increased the number of stitches that you need. So unlike the other side, there's not really a hole that you need to close up, so you will work the exact number of increases that you need to cast on for your integrated I-cord cast on. Something that you'll notice is this first stitch here appears as a knit stitch, and that's because we were knitting through the front and back loop. So depending on the overall goal of your fabric, if you're doing a fully reverse stockinette without any additional detailing, you may wish to purl through the front and back loop of your first increase so that that stitch appears in purl. In this case, I'm going to be okay with the appearance of this knit stitch here based on what else is happening at the underarm of this pattern. So that's no concern here, but something to consider on your project. If you're working fully in reverse stockinette, you may wish to consider working that first increase as a purl through the front and back loop as opposed to knit through the front and back loop.